Born as the ekaha of the ocean, guarded by the ekahakaha of the land. Born as the aki-aki of the ocean, guarded by the manie-nie aki-aki of the land. Born as the a'alaula of the ocean, guarded by the ala-ala vainui of the land. Born as the octopus, the he'e of the ocean, guarded by the alahe'e tree of the land. Born as the puhilo milo of the ocean, guarded by the milo tree of the land. Born as the a'ava of the ocean, guarded by the ava plant of the land. I'm Alexander Moore. I'm a PhD scientist. I've been working in Hawaii for about 30 years. And over those decades that I've been here, I've become really intrigued and very interested in the way that Hawaiian culture views the same things that I love: the landscape, the ecosystems, the ocean. The Hawaiians love all those things too, and they have their own language to describe those processes. And it's just a different way of looking at things. And for me, it's much more interesting, it's much more compelling, it's much easier to understand if you listen to everybody's voice, if you don't just listen to the voice of the scientist or the voice of the cultural practitioner, but if you bring those two things together and have everybody contributing to the conversation, it's a much more powerful and compelling story. The poem comes from the Kumulipo, which is the Hawaiian creation chant. And in the creation chant, as with many creation chants, it begins in darkness, and creatures are born out of that darkness. Male and female essences are born, and the very first organism born on this earth is the coral polyp. After the coral polyp, other organisms appear, and each organism in the ocean has a partner on the land, and the land creature guards the sea creature, and they're connected to each other.
I think the poem should serve as inspiration for how we should treat the oceans. In the poem, the creatures on the land guard the creatures in the sea, and I think that speaks to the fact that we as people need to be stewards, guardians, and protectors of the oceans.
In Hawaiian tradition, the sea is actually part of the land. It's considered part of the aina, even though we use different words, kai for saltwater and aina for land. Hawaiians view the ocean as being part of their landscape. And so when they think about how they're connected to the land, that aina extends out into the sea. And they understood this connection between everything that happened in the uplands, the mid-elevation, the nearshore environment, and out into the ocean as all being part of the same support system that they relied on in their communities. I think Hawaiian and Polynesian societies generally, or island societies even more generally, view the connection between the land and the ocean as integral to their existence. When you live on an island, those two things are always juxtaposed.
I'm from the North Shore of Long Island, which is part of New York, and growing up I was a 5-minute drive away from the beach, and I have always loved the ocean and the environment. And over the past few years, we've started to notice that we are hurting our environment. And you go to the beach in the summers and the beaches are closed because we're not taking good care of our environment. And it has a big detrimental impact. And so for me, living close to the ocean, you see firsthand the beaches are closed, there's too much pollution in it, bacteria levels are too high if it gets too hot. And we need to change our ways if we want to better help our ocean. But for someone who may not be a 5-minute drive from the ocean, or even has ever been to the ocean, I think that it's really important for us to educate others.
So I'm from upstate New York. Obviously that's not super close to any ocean. And I think that growing up kind of farther away from either coast makes it a lot harder to kind of recognize the impacts that you have on the ocean, even if you live thousands of miles away. And I think for a lot of people who grew up the way I did, you kind of have this out of sight, out of mind attitude about the ocean. And I think that if we're really going to try to manage our ocean sustainably, it's really important to make everyone recognize, regardless of where they live, they have an impact on the ocean. And I think that if we can recognize that, and if people do kind of have that understanding and have that appreciation for the ocean, no matter where they live, we'll have a much better shot of protecting our ocean in a sustainable way.
As visitors from the mainland, I think we can learn a lot from Hawaiian societies, and particularly the way that Hawaiians have always viewed the connection between the land and the ocean. It's part of their culture, it's part of who they are. Often we think of the ocean as something that divides us, divides human communities. Hawaiians view the ocean as connecting one community to another. It's the bridge that connects us all. And so I think that a much more holistic way of looking at things, as Hawaiians did, is a really good thing for us to think about, particularly as our world becomes much more interconnected. Those distances don't in fact separate us, they connect us. So when we think about the connections between land and sea, as the Hawaiians have always done, we see that it's very apparent in our modern society that these connections are important, and that things that we don't think about are very connected from land to sea. A really good example is to look at plastic. We use plastic all the time. We think that we've gotten rid of it either by recycling or put it in a landfill, and yet it shows up in the ocean. And when we look at the ocean, we see plastic that has come off of these landscapes from all around the world and is globally distributed by the global ocean. And so that's a really good example of a connection between land and sea that we really ought to be paying more attention to, because it extends not beyond that single issue, but to almost everything we do. For people who don't live near the ocean and don't think about the ocean a lot, I think one of the ways to understand better what the impact is for those of us on the continent is to think about water generally, water globally. If you have a stream, a pond, a creek anywhere near you, that connects you to the ocean. And so understanding that you're connected to the ocean through those terrestrial waterways is really important. And we see that when we look at materials moving down our creeks and entering into the ocean, nutrients or other pollutants. And so it's really important to think globally about how we use water and how we take care of our watersheds and waterways. I think we're coming to understand that the land and the sea are connected. And most of us obviously have grown up in a terrestrial environment, and most of us don't think very much about the ocean unless it's something that we're particularly interested in. And so we have thought about ways that we can take care of our landscape, restore our landscape. We plant trees on our landscape, we restore the soil, but we don't think very much about how to restore the ocean. And it's a much more difficult problem, not only because the ocean is much bigger, but it's also much less accessible. And so beginning to think about connecting those two things and the way that we take care of them, the way we malama aina, is really important, both on the land and in the sea.